Welcome, 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 folks. Welcome to all the humans who are coming on into the room. Let's see you arriving. Welcome, welcome, welcome. And as usual, welcoming some folks from the more than human world in with us today. See if you can notice or recall who this might be. A little quiet. You may have to bring your volume up. No, this is not a wonky violin. These are frogs. These are frogs, many frogs, in a melody. So today I welcome in frog beings, knowing that they're preparing to head into less active states this time of year, aren't we all? But they are preparing for the ones we humans call brumation, hibernation. Their metabolism is slowing down. Many of them will be burrowing into soft spaces for the winter. So as we start today, we wish frogs a safe fall and winter. Welcome to the Compassion Consortium Sunday Service. I'm Reverend Sarah Bowen, and I'm joined today by co-founders Victoria Moran and Reverend William Melton, as well as Phil and Elaine. To ensure we don't have unwanted or disruptive guests, we've turned some of the Zoom functions off. We meet for Sunday service once each month, and a reminder, starting in November, that will be on the 3rd, not the 4th Sundays. So we keep reminding you, and please update your calendars. If you're new to us, welcome. We are interfaith, interspiritual, and interspecies community. Interfaith means we welcome people of any system of meaning making, and we feature a diverse range of them. Today, we'll be talking with Dave Simon, chair of our advisory board, and Carol Saunders, an ordained unity and interfaith minister. Interspiritual is a term coined by Brother Wayne Teasdale. It means that we believe that underneath all of the specificities and the particularities of the world's religions and wisdom traditions, we can find commonalities, particularly shared values of peace, compassionate service, and love for the earth community. And finally, we are interspecies, which means when we say earth community, we mean everyone. Lions and tigers and bears and cows and chickens and squirrels, oh my. At the beginning of each service, I offer an acknowledgement drawing our awareness to beings who are indigenous to some specific habitat. And I realized this past week, thanks to a gaggle of geese overhead, that my acknowledgements can seem to treat animals as permanent residents of these habitats, which is quite misleading. So with the changing of the seasons today, I will acknowledge flyers on their fall migrations. Near me, that means out go the hummingbirds and the Canadian geese, in come the winter finches, and eventually the snow buntings. Do you know who's coming in and out of your habitat? As the seasons change, it's also the beginning of the fall holy days. September brings the Hindu celebration of the birth of Krishna. Muslims will be celebrating the birth of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, later this week. Friday was Mabon, or Mabon, if you're from the Midwest like I am, for our pagan and Wiccan friends, which celebrates the autumnal equinox, the second harvest, and the turning of schedules towards more nighttime. Yes, we humans' metabolism might be slowing down a little bit too. The Jains recently celebrated the birth of Mahavira, not the actual birth, but celebrated a renewal of the birth of Mahavira. As part of an 8-day festival that includes time for community gathering and heightened spiritual practice. On the last day of their 8-day festival, the followers request forgiveness from others for any offenses they committed during the last year. And of course, we're into the Jewish High Holy Days. Rosh Hashanah, the new year, was last week, and tonight, yes, tonight, begins Yom Kippur, time also dedicated to prayer and to repentance for misdeeds of the past year. Something is trending. Keeping track of holidays can be infinitely complex for interfaith communities. If you add up the feasts and the festivals, the observances, the fasts from just 9 of the most populated spiritual traditions, there are over 100 holy days a year. Now magnify that with the fact that scholars say there are over 4,200 religions being practiced worldwide. So basically every day is a celebration for someone, or every day is an observance for someone. Many go unnoticed or unacknowledged due to either ignorance, we don't know about other people's traditions, or time constraints, how can we possibly celebrate them all? Or because of religious observances that conflict on a calendar, like we have today. So for example, I know some of the Jewish members of our community are unable to be here today as they attend to their own religious needs, and I miss them. And at the same time, I'm delighted they're with their Jewish communities involved in fasting and deep prayer and contemplation. We said when we started the Compassion Consortium, if we can also be your vacation home if you have a home in another spiritual community as well. We can be a second home. And I understand that is the case for many of you. So I'm aware of the tension with having our Sunday service on a day that not all of the folks in our community can attend. And so I would just want to acknowledge that today. And second, as an interspecies advocate, I must acknowledge that some of the world's holy days include practices that are harmful to other humans and to other animals. I know some of you are working diligently on behalf of chickens suffering in the practice of caparot. Some of you are educating people about not using milk or ghee on their holy altars because animals are harmed in those processes. Some of you are helping people rethink what sacrificial rites might look like. Can we sacrifice something else other than beings? Thank you all for the important advocacy that you do so that people can keep their traditions and also reduce suffering from them. So what do we do here today? How can we celebrate all the beliefs and the festivities that are important to people in our community? Here's where interspirituality comes in, that term I tell you about every month. Interspirituality means we look underneath specific religious holidays or practices for what is the core intention. What is the core intention? And we honor that in an expansive way that invites everyone to participate. So today, as people around the world honor Yom Kippur, I'm going to invite us into a little bit of self-reflection about our own actions over the past year. Now, I know that repentance and atonement are words that might not land for all of you, but they are pretty good Scrabble words too. They have a lot of letters, and some of those are worth quite a bit. But they are important to people. And so we find those in these traditions that I mentioned, repentance and atonement. But let me try some words that might land for you. Guilt, mistakes, and forgiveness. How does that feel? Think for a moment, is there anything right now bouncing around in your mind that you feel guilty about? Or is there any moment you can think of where recently you went sideways of what you intended? You didn't quite do what you expected, and it's nagging at you. Can you think of a time that you spoke harshly to a friend or a family member or even a stranger? Or a promise to someone that you broke? Do you have any little white lies floating around in your conscience? Think of them for a minute and bring them to your mind gently. This is not to berate you. It's not to shame you, but it's to think about, what does forgiveness look like for the things that are bothering us? For some people, that might mean appealing to a deity, a spirit, or a higher power and asking for forgiveness. For others of you, it might mean searching deep inside of your own self to ask your truest self to help you move on from something and act more in alignment with your values going forward. Some of you might sense that a heartfelt apology is needed to someone. That's what came up for me this morning. And others of you might need to drop the expectation that someone owes you an apology for something and let it go. And for all of us, it means reminding our very, very critical selves to let up for a moment and let love in for a little bit of healing time. If you're not sure exactly how to deal with the guilt or the mistakes or the pain that you're feeling right now in this moment, that's okay. But I invite you to think about it this week. What does repairing your mistakes and misdeeds look like going forward? Because repairing is a key component of spiritual life. Indeed, an oft-noted paradox of spiritual living is the awareness that we are perfect. We are perfect just as we are. And we could also use a little improvement every now and then. William, over to you.
Yes, so this is the time when we read our Tenets of Agreement. And for today, we have a special treat, at least I believe. And so, as all of you know, Victoria Moran is our co-founder of the Compassion Consortium and founder of the Main Street Vegan Academy. And she is the person whom I live with Rupert and Thunder. So today, Victoria will read our Tenets of Agreement with us for today.
Thank you, Reverend William. I'm honored to read our tenets. Are you going to put those up, Phil? Thank you so much. We acknowledge a divine force at the heart of the universe and in all living beings. We may refer to this force as God, but it is known by many names and appears in different forms or as formless. We recognize the common moral principles inherent within all wisdom traditions. We affirm that compassion, reverence for life, and nonviolence are fundamental to religious faith and moral philosophy and are to be extended to all sentient beings. We stand by the principles of inclusion, diversity, and equality, and hold these as essential in our human relations. We hold that non-animals are imbued with the same essence of life and love as our human animals, and that there is moral parity between us. We avow that humans do not own the earth, its resources, or its inhabitants, but instead must be involved in their protection and care. We endeavor to eat and live in a kind and sustainable manner, moving away from animal foods and animal-derived clothing, as well as any activities that cause harm to our fellow beings, human or otherwise. We aim to provide spiritual comfort, fellowship, and food for thought to those practicing or exploring a vegan lifestyle. We offer guidance and peer support for all those seeking a more compassionate and spiritual life. We commit to sharing these principles freely with humility and respect in support of non-human animals and the earth.
Thank you, Victoria. It's nice to hear you read those today. If anybody feels called to read the tenets in a future month, please do email William at compassionconsortium@gmail.com. We love to add to that list. But I do love to hear your voice, Victoria. That was lovely. So it's time for a little bit of spiritual practice today. We always have a little bit of something, some sort of tool or practice that we're hoping that you can use out in your daily life. We're hoping it gives you a moment of rest or focus or whatever our intention is here today, but also that it's something that you can take with you. Each fall when Rosh Hashanah comes around, I recommit to observing a Sabbath, or what I call a Sabbath-ish, on Saturdays when I'm not teaching. And then I slip throughout the year and I have to recommit. So I'm constantly trying to find little Sabbath moments or moments of stillness during my day, even if it's just half a Saturday or 2 hours on a Wednesday or sometime that I'm not doing. And mental wellness research tells us that we need rest every day. We need rest every day. There's a report that was done a couple of years ago by some behavioral scientists, Emily and Amelia Nagoski, that said we needed to rest 42% of our day. Are any of you resting 42% of your day? Doesn't that sound like a lot? 42%. But let's include sleeping in there because sleeping's rest. Okay, so that's 8 hours. There's another 2 hours that we need to find for resting. So what can that look like? What are ways that you rest? For me, it's books, sitting outside half an hour reading a book with a cup of tea, soaking in some squirrel time outside, something where I just spend some time not doing, or having tea occasionally with Victoria, which is a lovely, restful time. What is it that you do? How do you rest during the day? You could try a practice called doggling. Has anyone heard of doggling? Doggling is a practice brought to us by animal chaplain Laura Brinkerhoff, one of our recent graduates. And so today she's going to be explaining it to you through a short video that we have. And then I'm hoping that you can try it at home sometime during the week. Now, as you might presume, doggling includes a dog. If you don't have a dog at home, you could also consider cattling with the cat, not the cows. Cattling, squirreling, starlingling. I don't know. You'll have to work it out, but let's start with a little bit of doggling. Phil, could you play the video?
This will be a demonstration of an interspecies meditation practice called doggling. Works best if the dog is sleeping, but the idea is to join them in rest, taking some nice deep clearing breaths. And just being with in the energy and the relationship without petting or interfering. Might have just seen Roscoe take a nice deep breath and release it. One of the goals here is co-regulation of the nervous system. An important factor is being aware of the interconnectedness, even as you are simply sharing space. And then checking in with how it feels to lay there, sharing the energy field, sharing the proxemics. And just noticing if the presence of dog has an impact on any of the senses. So it becomes an exercise in listening to the body, listening for the influence of the other species with you. Allowing the calmness to resonate between you. Doggling can last as long as each participant wishes, but a minimum of 10 minutes is recommended.
You know, how many people just want to lie down on the floor now with some furry family member, and that's just it for the day. If you feel that way, hold that thought, because Victoria's got an awesome conversation coming on up, but I do hope that doggling is helpful for you all, and that you start to add, as the time of our days and our season starts to slow a little bit, some rest into your daily cycle. Victoria, over to you.
Hey, everybody. Now that makes me want to do less Googling and more doggling. How about you guys? That was profound. So when humans have to follow dogs, it's always kind of a tough thing, but we've got a pretty cool human, and he is Dave Simon. You probably know Dave. He's quite active here, and he is the head of our board of advisors. Dave is also an attorney, a practitioner of Buddhism in 2 different lineages. He's an animal advocate and author of the seminal book, Meat-O-nomics. Welcome, David.
Well, thank you so much. It's an honor for me to be here.
And do you like to be called Dave or David? The David just came out.
I go by either. Dave is fine.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
So I heard that you were just a mild-mannered lawyer until one evening you watched a biopic on television. Is that true?
That's true. I watched a movie about Ingrid Newkirk, the founder of PETA, called I Am an Animal. And it made me curious about what was it that would have provoked her to go vegan. Like, why would somebody do that? It seemed crazy to me at the time. So I got into watching videos on PETA's website, and literally that night I went vegan. I took all my animal-based food out of the refrigerator and put it on my balcony. And for me, that was a sort of overnight transition. And many people have done it differently, but that's how I did it.
So were you already practicing Buddhism?
I was, but more with a mind toward meditation and thinking about koans than with a mind toward compassion for all beings and thinking about what I put on my plate.
Well, tell us that history and how they ultimately converged.
Well, I got interested in Zen Buddhism when I was in college because of largely writings of Westerners like Alan Watts, who wrote about these crazy riddles called koans, in which typically a student asks the teacher something, the teacher responds, and the riddle provides an instruction method for the ages. For example, and they're often irreverent. So a teacher asks a student, what is Buddha? And the Buddha says, dried dung. So they can be very irreverent, and they don't have an immediate answer. So anyway, I was interested in those. I was interested in meditation. It got me interested in Zen for many years, mainly as a way to think about meditating. And I was a long time meditator. 5 years ago or so, I read a book called Awakening Through Love by a guy named John McCransky, and it gave me and I went vegan in the meantime, by the way. I went vegan in 2008, but it wasn't Buddhism that drove me toward that. It was that Ingrid Newkirk movie. This book, Awakening Through Love, I think changed the trajectory of my vegan evolution from one that was somewhat angry and animal focused toward a trajectory that was less angry, more people focused, more compassionate, more loving, I hope.
What do you mean by people focused?
Well, there's a Will Tuttle talks about vegans going through 3 stages. He says first we start as shallow vegans, then we're angry vegans, then we're deep vegans. I don't know if I would use exactly those words, but I think there is an arc where people, particularly early on in our vegan lives, can harbor anger toward non-vegans because it's hard to understand. Once the light bulb has gone on for you, it's hard to understand why it hasn't gone on for somebody else. And it can make us angry with those people. And when I first went vegan, I moved down to Southern California and I was there for 10 years. And I did a lot of protests, and we stood outside of circuses, restaurants serving foie gras, pet stores selling puppy mill animals, etc., holding signs and chanting. And that's an effective method of activism and change. But there's also a good deal of anger in the energy that one brings to that form of activism. I would like to think that as we grow in our veganism, this has been the case for me, we begin to acknowledge that humans really matter. We need to love them all, even if they're not vegan, even if they are not aligned with us on the political spectrum. But that's part of our evolution, and it's part of how we define vegan. Like, I think when we first go vegan, maybe we think that vegan means compassion for animals. But I think ultimately we learn that vegan really means compassion for all beings, all sentient beings.
Wow. So your Buddhism has taken you to both the Mahayana and the Theravada schools. And can you tell us a little bit about how those differ in terms of vegetarianism and how you as a practitioner of both are bringing it all together?
So Zen is in the Mahayana school, and there's another meditation practice called Vipassana, spelled Vipassana, but pronounced in the Pali Vipassana. And I did a 10-day retreat in this Vipassana practice. So interesting. Theravada is based on the Pali canon, Pali being the language of the Buddha, the canon being the collection of writings attributed to Buddha and his disciples. Mahayana, on the other hand, is based on a much broader universe of Dharma, including these koans that we were talking about. The meditation methods are quite different. In Zen, there's a lot of focus on posture, sitting on a cushion cross-legged. In fact, I think you can see my cushions behind me. And if you sit in a group with a teacher, often they'll walk around with like a yardstick and tap you to correct your posture. In Vipassana, there is very little emphasis on posture. And in fact, I was stunned when I went to this retreat and I sat in a room with 100 people, 50 men, 50 women. The accoutrements and equipment that people brought in to assist in sitting was just, it was so different from the Zen tradition. And they took away our phones, so I couldn't get a photo of it, but I would love to have a photo. Some people had built like thrones around their sitting area so that every part of their body was supported. This is important because there's a difference in how one sits. In Zen, we typically sit for maybe 30 or 35 minutes. That's about when your body starts to feel discomfort. In the Vipassana tradition, it's important to sit for an hour. The idea being, we're trying to understand that everything is transient. The Pali word for that is anicca. And so if we feel some discomfort at the, say, 45-minute mark, we need to sit through that and overcome it. And so because of this, because the sit lengths are maybe twice what they are for Zen, there's this definite discomfort. Toward the 50-minute mark, one begins to feel a lot of discomfort, this Vipassana method.
So what about the vegetarianism of the two groups? If we were to run into someone who identifies with one or the other, are we going to get a different take on dinner?
So I have a few theories on that. As between those two schools, no, I don't think so. The first Buddhist precept says don't kill, and it's a much broader precept than the Judeo-Christian commandment do not kill. The Judeo-Christian commandment has been interpreted to only be an injunction against unlawful killing. Obviously, there are many arguments around that. The Buddhist precept is an injunction against killing any sentient being. So one has to wonder, why would any adherent to the Buddhist tradition ever consume meat, eggs, or dairy? I think there are a few reasons. One is that there's a tradition, particularly among monks, of accepting gifts from the lay community. And it's thought that even if you're vegan or vegetarian, if somebody gives you a fish or a piece of meat, first of all, because you didn't kill it yourself, you're arguably not violating a precept by eating it. But second, there's a very important component to accepting generosity that supersedes the injunction stated in that precept. And obviously that applies to monks, not to lay practitioners, but I think that mentality has trickled down. When I first moved to Southern California, I had been vegan for only a little while, and I was excited about possibly joining a community of many vegans. I went to a Buddhist ceremony one Sunday at a temple. They have ceremonies just like church. And afterward, there was a fellowship meeting, again, just like church, and they were serving ham and cheese sandwiches. And I asked one of the elders, somebody probably analogous to a deacon, what I thought Buddhists were vegan or vegetarian. He said, no, we cut ourselves slack. So I think that sometimes a leader, someone like Thich Nhat Hanh, rises up, who leads a group, like in his case, Plum Village, and he directs his followers to go vegan. But I think throughout Buddhism, there are many schools that might have a leader like that and many that don't. But I think for the most part, they cut themselves slack, just the way every non-vegan in the world does.
And Thich Nhat Hanh did not, so God bless him.
Yeah.
So, Dave, you wrote a book back in 2013 that was absolutely extraordinary. I remember in the night, kind of saying to William, look at this. Did you ever think about this? And that book is Meat-O-nomics. And I loved it at the time, and I love it still, because I have come to the understanding that not everybody cares about animals, and not everybody really cares about taking care of their health. And not everybody really makes the connection between what we do and the state of the environment. So there needs to be another reason for stopping eating animals. And you came up with it. So tell us about that.
So the main idea behind this book is that we need to look at the market for animal foods differently. Now, in my bio, I think it says that I'd like to fix the broken market for animals. I'd like to eliminate this market completely, but we have to be realistic about existing reality. It's common for commentators and economists to look at the market for animal foods and say this is a demand-driven market. In other words, consumers who have a taste for animal flesh or cheese are driving the levels of consumption that we see in the country. But I argue in the book that it's actually a supply-driven market. That is, producers engage in a variety of behaviors that manipulate consumer behavior, get consumers to buy way more animal products than they would otherwise, and effectively deprive consumers of the ability to make informed choices about what they eat. And I know we have very limited time, but I will, the basic framework of that argument is that producers do this in three ways: through manipulating retail prices, keeping prices very, very low, which makes people buy way more than they would; through very aggressive messaging, often using the government, particularly the federal government, to convey their message to consumers, and through aggressive lawmaking, passing dozens or scores of laws every year that make it difficult for us to criticize, investigate, or even sue these producers, which again affects the market.
So that's a completely different way of looking at it. What kind of response did you get from government and industry and readers?
Well, we know that, so one of the solutions to this broken market that I propose is a 50% meat tax. And obviously a tax at that level would radically reduce consumption and have many other great benefits. I don't know if it's particularly related to the book or independent of the book, but we know that in the last decade since the book has come out, governments in at least 4 countries, Denmark, UK, Sweden, I think Norway, have proposed meat taxes. And I think it's literally just a matter of time before a meat tax passes somewhere. I would guess it would be the EU before the US, just because they're typically more progressive on matters of regulating animal agriculture. Has the book entered the mainstream of American thought? Probably not yet. It was, I will say, it was big in Australia, bigger than here. But one never knows where your books are going to land, as you know, having much more experience publishing books than I do.
Well, my favorite story on that was a friend called Nathaniel Altman, who's a theosophist and was our guest some months ago. And his best-selling book was Sexual Palmistry. In Germany, it went crazy and was like the big deal that he lived on for 3 years. So you never know with books. But
Right.
I want to ask you, David, you say, and I've read several articles, this guy's been all over. He's been in The Guardian, he's been everywhere. And you think that medical doctors play a major role in making this shift happen. How so?
Because I look back to what happened with tobacco. And if you look back 70 or 80 years ago, when 2 out of 3 adult Americans or something like that smoked cigarettes or consumed tobacco in other forms, there was an ignorance in the medical community, or even a blatant willfulness to ignore the effects of tobacco consumption. And this persisted for decades. And it was only when the medical community finally began to acknowledge, hey, smoking is not good for us. It's going to give us lung cancer, emphysema, and other problems, that the tide turned, and eventually legislatures started to change the way that lawmaking was done around cigarettes. Instead of being subsidized, tobacco is now taxed. That's a huge difference, because we subsidize animal foods today, and instead they should be taxed. We're at the same stage with animal foods, roughly, with respect to how the medical community has responded, that we were, say, 60 years ago, 70 years ago, with the medical community's take on tobacco. Once the medical community, for example, once it's mandatory for medical students to take a course in nutrition at all medical schools, which it isn't yet, and once those nutrition courses talk about the benefits of a plant-based diet, and once that information becomes part of the standard of care in medical communities in the United States, I think we will see legislatures and policymakers respond in the same way that they did when tobacco began to be regulated much more aggressively.
Well, that would be very exciting. And it happened with that. So it could happen with this. And there's so much writing on it. So the book is Meatonomics, How the Rigged Economics of Meat and Dairy Can Make You Consume Too Much, and How to Eat Better, Live Longer, and Spend Smarter. I don't know if you're aware of this, David, but on Amazon, they give this a recommendation as a men birthday gift. So
Okay.
so that's what the algorithm thinks. But
Right.
I'm a girl and I loved this book. I always like to ask our guests, what they're most passionate about right now, and you knew immediately. And you said it is the vegan meditation group that you co-lead online every Monday. Tell us about that.
This group evolved from the frustration we were talking about earlier around the idea that proponents of compassion, often in the Buddhist community, often in other spiritual traditions, may not be vegan. And so it's difficult for somebody who eats a cheeseburger, it's difficult to hear that person tell you, let's now do a metta prayer for all beings. There's just a disconnect and an awkwardness there. So with a very good friend who's in Tahoe, with whom we used to have a in-person meditation group that sort of went defunct around the time of the pandemic, and some other founders, we started this vegan meditation group. It's a very short meeting. It's 30 minutes. People show up and meditate for 15 minutes, and then there's a brief discussion period. And it's turned out to be a hit with people because it's a way to get past this limitation that we want to be mindful, we want to be compassionate, and yet often the people we turn to, I'm thinking right now of even the Dalai Lama, who's Buddhist, but apparently only vegan every other day because he had hepatitis and his doctor told him he needed to eat meat. It's a way for us to look beyond the limitations that we sometimes find as vegans who are pursuing a more spiritual or mindful way of life.
Beautiful. Thank you for doing that. Thanks for writing a fabulous book. Thanks for being so actively involved with the Compassion Consortium.
Thanks.
Thank you so much. And today we have with us Reverend Carol Saunders for a guest in Compassion in Action. She's the founder of the Spiritual Forum podcast, prayer and retreat ministry, writer of the Wolf and the Lamb blog, a Unity minister, and organizer of the Whole Planet Spirituality Forum and Retreat. Hi, Reverend Carol. Thanks for coming today. We're so glad you're with us.
I apologize for coming on late.
Oh, we're just glad you're here. Well, first, I'd like to ask you a bit about your journey in becoming an animal advocate vegan. How did that start, and when, and what was your motivation?
I was a late bloomer. I mean, I became vegetarian when I was 15, took me a long time to become vegan. And I think I awakened to advocacy kind of late. I think it honestly happened at a writing retreat where I was supposed to write, my own book, and I couldn't come up with anything. And I just felt like the presence of like the Fillmores, Charles and Myrtle Fillmore, calling me forward to really speak about the animals. So that's really kind of how it started. I don't remember when that was, 2008, something like that, 2010. And then, get led by Spirit and met Lisa Levinson and met Judy. I put forth a proposal to do a seminar at a Unity convention to resurrect Charles Fillmore's teachings on animals and ethical vegetarianism, and it got accepted. This is like in 2017 or 18 or so. And that was when I really first kind of really got myself in front of people in Unity, that this was my passion, my topic, to resurrect these teachings. From the pulpit, I would bring up vegan activism kind of in a softball way. And I would have Earth Day potlucks and things like that. But I really wasn't a hard hitter from the pulpit. But people knew I had a lot of sidebars about the animals and about compassion and whatnot. But that's kind of something that was kind of growing through me about how to really find my voice as a minister.
Beautiful. You mentioned Charles and Myrtle Fillmore, the founders, and I know part of your work also includes the rebirth of vegan values to the Unity Church. How are you doing that within the community, and how are you extending it beyond the Unity group?
It's a really good question. The Unity group is a hard nut to crack. It shouldn't be, but it is. Anybody who knows anything about Unity, our founders in the early 19th century. This is actually the early 20th century, excuse me, early 1900s. You know, they had awakened to how important our relationship with animals was to our ability to experience universal love, have world peace, spiritually develop, and live ethically. And they taught this, and they had, you know, a vegetarian restaurant and a food company, and they bound their Bibles in non-leather and all these really, really, really progressive things back then. It was a big deal, unity in the early 1900s. And we've kind of fallen away from that. So I table there every year at the convention. I have this retreat to try to plant these seeds and get it back out into the churches and let people remember where from whence we came. Now, how do I extend that outward? The retreat that I have at Union Village, I know you're going to ask me about that later. Everyone's invited. Everyone's invited. We could have, we want everyone to come. And so that's one way to kind of get the message of out there. Also, my podcast, I've got one coming out tomorrow. You guys are going to love it. It's called Animals and Christian Ethics, and it's with Dr. Lisa Kemmerer. And about every other month or so, I have a vegan message on my podcast. It's not a vegan podcast, but I bring in the message, bring in a guest about every other month or so to make sure that that's part of the spiritual path.
I love that, Carol. And, you know, I'm finding out the older I get how important it is to be vegan in a non-vegan world. So the fact that your podcast embraces a lot of humanity and not just vegans, I think is a good way to spread the vegangelist message. Let's talk about that gathering. That's coming in October, I believe on the 19th to the 22nd. And our Victoria Moran said that attending that event spoke to her heart in a very unique way. So can you tell us about what's so special about this event?
Yeah, that's a really good question. You know, first, I just want to say to anybody who's out there who's thinking about coming, you can spend 3 days with Renee King-Sonnen and with Victoria and with Reverend Sarah and some really awesome people, Silas Rao. I think because it's spiritually focused and it's also really about vegan values. And like last year, 20% of our attendees weren't vegan at all. And we saw their hearts open during the 3.5 days we were together. And we're also accepting of everybody. So we invite curious omnivores. I know that's offensive to some people, but we want them to come. We want them to hear this message. We want them to see how loving that we are. And so we're infusing this time where we have great speakers and spiritual practices and music. And I think what happens is, we close it with this an amazing ritual, but I think what happens is our hearts really open. And this year, our theme is called Peace Begins With Me. So it really is about how do we as vegan advocates, how do we as pre-vegans, whoever we are attending, how do we find this inner alignment so that we are peaceful people, so that when we bring this message into the world, we're really, really effective. You know, our message is a message of peace and love and harmony. So if we're not feeling it in here, and if we're feeling a lot of angst, then it's really hard for us to be effective as a peace and harmony and love movement. So I think that's what makes it special. It's the people, the connection, the love, the collaboration, and the spiritual practices. You know, because it is a spiritual practice, right? Veganism is a spiritual practice, and we really honor that.
That's exceptional. I do think Reverend Sarah and I have talked about this before, that vegan can be a term that doesn't feel inclusive to a lot of people. And I love that you arranged this event so people's hearts open and we welcome everyone. And what Dave was saying earlier, that as vegans, we start out loving animals, but we need to love humans very much so.
It's so important.
I'm sorry.
It's so important. I'm just saying that if we can't say we're about love unless we do everything we can to love everyone, you know?
Yes, it's so important to remember, and harder for some of us. You mentioned also, well, I know you're a Unity minister, and you spread a lot of the spirit of compassion almost 100% through your work. And we see that in your spiritual forum and your podcast and your prayer and your retreat ministry. How did the development of that ministry of compassion come about?
Well, that's a really good question. I do think it kind of comes about from deciding to live a life of integrity, like either
Mhm.
you're going to be it or just talk about it. And I just think it's really important to share that the animals, I think it's really important so first of all, I'm a minister. Part of my job is bring people to God, okay, or bring people to their spiritual center. And how can you do that if you just cut off so much of creation? So I think to me, it was just really about awakening to who am I and who am I in all of creation and what is my life about, So part of life is speaking the truth. Part of it is acting, the truth. And part of it is dreaming about the world that we can create. So I think all of it just kind of came about by stepping into what Spirit was asking me to do. I don't know if that makes sense to a lot of people if you haven't really felt a calling, but when you feel it inside, like this is what you're being asked to do, then it's a matter of just saying yes. And then knowing that once you say yes, it's kind of like the Red Sea parts. People show up and things start happening. And then, you step into this is my purpose. I don't know if that answers your question or not, but I don't know how you can be in ministry and compassion not be a big part of your ministry.
It does. And that what you said about the calling reminds me of the great master of Santmat, Shan Singji, who said that once you hear about the path, you can never really turn your back on it.
You can't. And once you
Yeah.
say yes, you're on a path. It's like getting on a roller coaster you can't get off of, but it's a fun ride.
We're happy you're on it. I have one last question when I like to ask all of our guests. What's the one thing we can all do immediately, do today after we leave this meeting to make the world around us a more compassionate place?
Yeah. Okay, so just really quickly, the reason I wasn't on earlier is because I was at a kind of memorial service celebration of life for a friend of mine that passed. And I'm bringing this up because I didn't find out about this until Friday night. And I jumped through hoops to make sure that my husband and I were here. And I'm bringing this up because I think the one thing we can do is to say yes to every opportunity to connect, to be with people, to not say, oh, that's too hard, or, oh, I'll see them another time. These are times where we must be in relationship and reach out across the aisle to people who we don't like, people who we don't understand, people we disagree with, people who we've had arguments with, or people who we're just disconnected from. I think the one thing we can do to make the world a more compassionate place, other than give up dairy, is to just say yes and to connect with absolutely every opportunity we have.
Oh, Carol, that's not only pearls of wisdom, those are diamonds. They're sparkling. Thank you so much for being with us. And I, for one, will be listening to Animals and Christian Values on your podcast on Monday.
Oh, it's a hoot.
Can't wait. Looking
It's a lot of
forward to
laughing. It's fun.
it. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you, everyone.
Sarah, back to you.
Thank you. And I just want to honor both Elaine and Carol today. Both of you have had losses. Carol just mentioned losing a friend. Elaine, I know you lost a member of your animal family recently, Miss Scooter. And so for both of you, really walking your walk and talking your talk, showing up here today in the midst of loss, to do this work that we're all trying to do together. Aren't we kind of constantly in the midst of loss, right? And it's one of the reasons that people turn to spirituality, people turn to religion, people turn to different philosophical paths, is those why questions. Why is there suffering? And those what do I do questions. What do I do when I'm suffering or when other people are suffering around me? That's a lot of reasons why we have religion and spiritual paths and why we can use them when our hearts are broken, whether that's a close relationship that we've just lost, or whether it's some of the stuff we've been talking about today that's going on in the world that we're involved in advocacy with, right? Heartbreak can be personal, it can be systemic, it can be existential, it can happen in so many different ways. It is the time of year of animal blessings, folks. October 4th is St. Francis feast day. It's also World Animal Day. So we've got a secular and a Christian holiday at the same time. In many synagogues, the story of Noah is read. There's a whole lot of different ways that things happen around this kind of culmination of animals that show up in places that they don't normally show up at other times during the year. Dogs and cats and rabbits and guinea pigs and all sorts of animals will be taken to houses of worship by humans, and there can be some pros for that. They're seen and they're valued, and there can be some cons of that. Let's just say my cats don't want to get in a car, go nowhere. So, there are some pros, there are some cons of this, but we cannot deny this is the time of year when animals tend to show up in different places, and we can help that. We can help that in our other religious and spiritual communities. Phil, if you could bring up the slides. I decided that instead of doing a cat and dog blessing for y'all, this time I was going to twist that a little bit, as we do around here, shake things up. Of course, little St. Francis for you, Elaine, right there. A little bit of the inspiration for these blessings that came around. But what I'd really like to do, Phil, if you go to the next slide, is I would like to do a blessing for animals who were lost this year. Animals who were lost, who were in the captivity of humans. We often bless the living animals. What about blessing the animals who we've just lost? So obviously blessings for Miss Scooter, who lived with Elaine, and sending prayers to you and your whole animal family for ease and comfort during this time of transition. And as I honor a few other animals in my sacred send-offs way, I invite you, and Phil will open the chat here for you all, but I invite you to put the names in of anyone who was lost this year or recently for you, so that we can include them in our blessings. And then, Phil, if I'm not asking you too many things to do at the same time, opening the chat, go ahead to the next slide. This one's been sticking with me. This is 18,000 unnamed cows who were killed in a massive, massive accidental explosion on a dairy farm. 18,000 of them. Some of them may have had some names, but they were not reported. And I'm not sure that they did. They might have had numbers. But we offer blessings for all of those who are lost or killed or exploited, who remain unseen, or who are only seen in catastrophes like this. And Phil, we'll move on to the next one, a blessing for animals who are subjected to large crowds in the name of religious rituals. This year, the elephant pictured here, Balarama, who for a decade carried the golden howdah in this different ritual. He died from tuberculosis. So blessings for Balarama. And I saw an amazing article the other day about robotic elephants being used in rituals. Very, very, very cool. All right. Now on screen, we have Lolita, also known as Toki or Toki Tai. We talked about Lolita last week, a captive female orca who spent 5 decades in captivity at Miami Seaquarium and was just about to be released and passed away. So we have blessings on Toki. I'm going, yes, thank you for keeping up with me here, Phil. You are on it. Animals held captive in captive breeding programs at zoos. This is one of those things that I can get up on a soapbox a little bit about captive breeding. This is Lin Hu, a panda who was held in the China Conservation and Research Center for Giant Pandas in Wolong and she died this year. So blessings for Lin Hugh. And moving on to my last one here, I'd like to point out specifically, and I may be a little loquacious here, a little long-winded, but blessings for animals who attempt to liberate themselves, and those attempts are thwarted, and their reactions to being held captive are commercialized and pop culturized. Let me explain. This is Boquito. Boquito was a male Western gorilla born in captivity who lived most of his life in a zoo in Rotterdam in the Netherlands. And he got a lot of media coverage, not here in the US, but got a lot of media coverage there because he injured a couple humans. And if you read the stories of what happened, you can see that he was taunted. You can see he was treated poorly, and he was responding and reacting to what was happening around him. Sadly, these actions were pop culturized. So here's what happened. The week after Boquito escaped at a certain point, and afterwards, a local health insurance company, after they had gotten Boquito back, sponsored the production of 2,000 paper visors they called Boquito viewers that disguised the direction of the wearer's gaze, so that now that Boquito was back in his cage, he could be looked at, not disturbed, because you were hiding your eyes with paper visors. The paper visors and the ad agency that designed them and the health insurance company won 2 advertising awards. I have very, very, very mixed feelings about this. And shortly after one of the times that he injured a human, the word of the year in 2007 in the Netherlands became Boquito proof, which meant durable enough to resist the actions of an enraged gorilla. That irritates me. So blessings on Boquito. I am so sorry that you spent so much time in a place, that you got out, that you got pulled back in. I hope that wherever you are in the what's next now, you are free from pain and suffering and getting to do whatever the heck it is that lights up your soul. Admittedly, these are just a few of the animal losses this year, but there was also a big victory for animals held captive. So I need to put that in because this is blessings and joys. We do joys and challenges. After relentless campaigning, the Universe Soul Circus is finally animal free, like many other circuses are tending to be now. So we have some victories along with our heartbreak. Phil, if you could go on to the next slide. I have seen so many different folks that you all have put in the chat who also need blessings or prayers. I'm going to point out just a few. A deer who a friend of Victoria got hit accidentally by a car, for the friend, for the deer, for Willow and Nugget, who lived with Ruth, for Chuck D, beloved cat who lived with Addie. Hey, Rupert came through his emergency surgery this month. Yay, Rupert, resilient Rupert. For Andy's beautiful Jack, for Belfast, the fawn that was found too injured to survive Laurie's sister's yard, Astrid, the magic rabbit, the chickens killed in a truck overturn in Georgia, Shayna, the beloved dog of friends and neighbors, all horses who have to pull carriages in cities. Amen. The rat that got taken out by a hawk right before, William's eyes. Oh no, this was Phil, on Phil's eyes before, on your way to work. What a thing to see. Yeah, I have mixed feelings about all of that one too. The cat who died at Ernesto's sanctuary in Syria when it was hit by some sort of shelling. Yes, all the animals who get hit and injured in war. Ninja, Legia, Joel's cat hanging on after surgery Friday. Blessings and of healing for all of those who are recovering from surgery, yes, or who are ill or injured. Animals who were lost in the Hawaii fire, and the floods in Lebanon, and all weather disasters. All the animals who are lost. and Lori's Aunt Karen's cat Allie. Thank you all. Thank you all. It is meaningful and it is important that we witness these losses, that we offer prayers and blessings for all of those who are lost. And I know some are still coming into the chat. Phil, if you could take us to the prayer that we all say together. Take a deep breath with me. It can be a lot. It can be a lot to take in what we just did, what we just witnessed. It can be a lot to take in everything we talk about here in Sunday service. But we do this because we want to witness and we want to encourage change in the world. Taking a breath, repeating with me if you would like the words on the screen. May all creatures everywhere be happy and free. May the thoughts, words, and actions of our lives contribute to this happiness and this freedom for all. May it be so. Amen. Amin. So mote it be. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. I have added more ending words. If I missed your ending words on this slide, please add those from your religious or your spiritual tradition. Thank you so much for joining us today for Compassion Consortium Sunday Service. And William has announcements.
Okay, all right. I'm unmuted. So now is when we do some announcements about what's coming up in the future, and there's some really exciting ones. They're all exciting ones. So the first is Phil. I think you will let people turn on their video cameras. I think that's part of what we do right now. And so in any event, I just want to go through some of the things that are going to be coming up soon. One is, we keep saying this again and again and again, but we are going to change schedule, and we're going to change our schedule, our service schedule, starting on November 19th from that point, okay? So now, our next slide, 6, that is about our next month, and that is for October 22nd for our service. And our special spiritual guest on October 22nd will be John Pierre. So John is very well known as a vegan fitness trainer, trainer to the stars, Ellen DeGeneres, Pamela Anderson, Emily Deschanel. And he is now a longtime animal activist and a champion of the elderly and survivors of a domestic abuse. So he lives with an assortment of rescued wildlife animal as he raises funds through his nonprofit, which is called livingwithharmony.org, to purchase property to expand his rescue capabilities and to help preserve native Colorado flora and wildlife species. So our Compassion in Action guest for October will be David Green, whom you may know. He's a native lifelong Brooklynite, a former MTV co-host of Oddville TV, a former congressional candidate, and David is the founder of the NYC Vegetarian and Vegan Meetup, which has 19,000 members. It's the largest vegetarian and vegan meetup in the world. So David's a longtime vegan activist, and his organization is one of the most effective and active vegetarian and vegan meetups in the United States. And they regularly have meetups throughout New York City and New Jersey. So then we have our next engaged member practice, which will be held on October 16th at 8 p.m. So Reverend Sarah will be leading a sew-in practice to honor black cats, bats that fly, and rats that scurry. These are some of my favorite things. So then The next announcement is calling all Texans. The consortium co-founder Victoria will speak along with Dr. Joel Furman and other folks you know at the best plant-based conference ever, happening in Dallas from December 30 to October 1, with special events such as Let's Get Cooking sessions and guided meditations. So following that is the Sacred Pause Summit. That's October 9 to 13. And Victoria and Reverend Sarah will join over 40 international speakers and topics, ranging from energy medicine to practical tools that inspire balanced and joyful living with our animal companions in this online conference organized by Dr. Jeff Feynman, who's a Compassion Consortium engaged member. So then, as we've already mentioned, our third annual fall retreat, Peace Begins with Me, will be held at Unity Village on October 19 through 22, 4 days and 3 nights of workshops, tools, and practices for creating a whole planet spirituality. And the featured guest will be Renee King from the Rowdy King Girl Sanctuary. And I believe that we are now at the announcements, Sarah.
Well done, William. That was a lot of announcements.